is van life actually what we think van life is? But as we know, for 2026, there's an elephant in the room. A tractor is coming the other way. The hedges are closing in. What are you feeling? But what are my goals for 2026? You know, logic says that £100,000 van is much better. But is it? They say money buys freedom. But in the world of campervans, is that actually true? Or does it possibly handcuff you? Happy New Year and welcome to 2026. We've said goodbye to 2025. And yeah, it was a difficult year, but we have got through it. It was a year we saw a lot of change, massive change in the campervan world. But what has 2026 got in store for us? In previous years, I've sat here now and I've talked about, is campervan life worth it for the next year? You know, getting your campervan winter ready and also the best winter gadgets. But we're not doing that today. Although those videos are coming, although with a bit of a twist on what I've done previously. So do look out for those over the next few weeks, maybe months or so. You know, do subscribe if you don't want to miss them. But today we need to talk about van life. Has something changed? Because walking around the NEC shows last year, looking at the vans, that cost more than my first house. In fact, it was more than double my first house. You know, I realised that, is van life actually what we think van life is? You know, is it a movement? Is it people choosing to live in campervans? Is it people going away for weekends in a van? Is it people who live full-time in a van? Or has it just become a marketing buzzword used for selling expensive campervans and influencers trying to earn a living? And I will actually add here that, for clarity's sake, there are lots and lots of good people doing van life and earning a living out of it. That is definitely not an insult. There are some very, very good van life channels out there, which I'm sure you're already subscribed to. You know, I've made a big decision about my own future in 2026. I have a plan for this channel and for my travels. Well, it might be a bit of a shock to a few of you who kind of know me as the VW guy. Yeah, weirdly, some people do call me that, even though VW don't even know I even exist. Staycation Steve's another one, and maybe some other derogatory words as well, but might I talk about that in a future video. But this year isn't all going to be about VWs, but I'm going to share some of those plans with you later in this video. But first, we need to answer that question. What is van life? You know, this can be a term that really does cause a lot of arguments. And depending who you speak to, you're going to get conflicting answers. You know, on one side of it, you've got those people who are living full-time in their vans, carrying their entire belongings with them everywhere they go, washing in streams, you know, dealing with the daily grit, which they have to. You know, they say that if you have a house, you aren't van life. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you have the leisure crowd, the weekend campers. Yeah, that's where I kind of fall into. The people who work hard all week so they can escape to the lakes, the mountains or the coast. Maybe on that Friday night after they've finished a hard week's work, you know, staying in fully serviced campsites, having hot showers, they've got toilet facilities, there's a restaurant where they can have a hot meal and a drink. Is that van life? Or is that just a holiday? You know, you've also got lots of other variations in between. You've got stealth campers, wild campers, people taking a break, not booking campsites, but finding that quiet place to stay. Maybe a pub car park, maybe using the facilities, you know, maybe using the facilities of a leisure centre so they can have a shower and things. Or they might even be self-contained with their own toilets. There is a lot of variation from one end of that spectrum where, you know, people might have to live in a van. They might not have anything else. It might not have been an original choice for them. But then you might have that person who goes, well, I'm actually going to sell my house. I'm going to give it all up and I'm going to live in a van and take everything with it. But like I said, you've got that big chunk in the middle, which I probably will say that most of us do fit into, the leisure camper. But here's my thoughts for 2026. Whether you're living in a van because you have to, or you're escaping in a van because you want to, let's just all embrace it. You know, I see far too much negativity on social media. People picking apart people's setups. You bought a factory build, you're a cheat. Your van is too old. You're on a holiday, you're not a van lifer. You're a mug for paying that much for a van. Why have you bought the new Ford? It's a Ford, it's not a Volkswagen. You know, we're all different. We've all got different budgets. We have different lifestyles. Who cares what anybody else thinks? You know, why mock somebody else for their decisions? You know, just get on with your own life. In 2026, van life isn't about living in a van versus a holiday. You know, it's about priorities. If you own a van, you are making a choice to prioritize the experience over comfort. We have chosen a van for the adventure. You know, we could be booking cheap budget hotels. You know, we could be staying in different places in these hotels. It'd probably be cheaper for a lot of us, especially if you've spent that big money on a van. But we have chosen a van for a reason. And I'm not here to tell you what van to drive, what van to buy. You know, I'm not here to mock any choices which you've made, but I'm just here to help those choices along. You know, guide you as to what you kind of should be looking for, what questions you should be asking these converters. You know, things to be looking at when you're comparing prices. You know, is that £70,000 van and that £70,000 van actually the same what you're looking for? Or does that one contain better interior spec, but this one might look better? You know, where is that money going in the van? That's kind of all I'm helping you to do. I'm not telling you what to buy. The intention of my videos is just to help you on the way, help you compare, you know, what you're buying. However, does the van that you drive actually ruin the experience? You know, let's talk some numbers. You can go out today and you can buy a camper for over £100,000. It has a wet room, heating, modern gadgets, ambient lighting, and much more. Or you can buy a rusty old van for 500 quid. You know, logic says that that £100,000 van is much better. But is it? You know, I have to ask, do people actually use the £100,000 vans? Or do they wrap them up in cotton wool, polish them till there's no paint left, and then rarely take them out? Imagine you're in that £100,000 van, you're driving down a single track lane in Cornwall, a tractor is coming the other way, the hedges are closing in. What are you feeling? Are you feeling freedom? Or are you feeling a little bit concerned, maybe a little bit worried that your pride and joy is about to be scratched? You're stressed, you're effectively handcuffed to the value of your vehicle. I will add, some of you, that is, not all, but I do know people who feel exactly that. You know, during COVID times, that tractor might have been a Chelsea tractor in the middle of the road going absolutely nowhere near the bushes because they're terrified to get a scratch. I witnessed that a lot, especially around the Seven Bays area, you know, around Padstow and all that place. But now imagine that you're in that £500 rusty van. It's already got the dents, it's got the character. The tractor comes, you reverse into the hedge, crunch. Who cares? You laugh, you wave to acknowledge the driver with a smile on your face. You know, I saw this in Spain when I went over recently. You know, all the vans around the Caminito del Rey, they were all old, all parked up, stealth camping. And they were old, a lot of them were battered as well. You know, they were there to do the climbing, the hiking. You know, people take these kind of vans to do surfing, biking, or just living that outdoor lifestyle. They are not there to pose. They are there for that purpose. You know, this is the controversial truth for 2026. The cheaper the van, the more freedom you actually have. The guy in that rusty van can park it anywhere. He can go down any lane and he can sleep soundly. But that guy in the £200,000 best of everything campervan, staying on expensive campsites because he's scared that somebody might nick his spare wheel, or maybe get Devon rash going down the lanes. Or is he working far too hard during the week to actually pay for the van rather than be able to get out there and use it? So who is having more fun? The expensive van owner or the cheap van owner? You know, I want to ask you, I want you to comment below because I really want to know. Does your van own you, or do you own your van? You know, of course, there are loads of people with expensive vans who use them exactly as they're intended. You know, I know people with in excess of £100,000 van who use them on loads of different adventures. They take them through all sorts of terrain. They get all sorts of situations around them in salty paths and They're doing all sorts of stuff because they're using it exactly as they want to do, exactly as they built it for. It's off-grid capable. It's built for the off-road, and that is exactly what it's doing. And that's what you should be doing, whatever the value of that van is. You know, given the choice, then yes, I would have that expensive van with all the modern tech and the creature comforts. Like I've said loads and loads of times recently, it is a case of just getting out there and using the van, whether it is that 500 quid van, or it's the 100,000 or the 200,000, that off-road beast which can go anywhere, built for everything. Just use it. Make sure that you do use it. But that brings me on to another topic. You know, if we don't need an expensive camper and a cheap one is okay, why do people pay the VW tax? Well, historically, it's been shown that it's got better residual values. Prices remain much stronger. And for some people, it's because that they aren't just interested in buying a vehicle. They are buying into the scene. You know, look at the Dubbed Out Festival. It is massive. Thousands of people go. You know, you go there and it's like a family. You know, there are many other VW clubs, local clubs, festivals, and loads of different events that people want to be part of. You know, that aftermarket parts supply and things like that is absolutely huge. People buy the VW because they want to belong to that. You know, I've been guilty of it, but I talk about VWs all the time. That's not necessarily because I'm biased. You know, if you go to the NEC show, it is a sea of VW transporters. They dominate the campervan hall. Like I've said, I am not biased. It is a fact. You know, next time you go out, count how many transporters you see against other campervans. There's certainly a lot around. But as we know, for 2026, there's an elephant in the room. The VW Transporter, the new one, the T7, is a Ford. It's built in Turkey alongside the Ford Transit Custom. It has a Ford engine, a Ford chassis. It contains a lot of Ford. But actually, the retail price of the VW is cheaper than it is to buy the Ford. But the Ford has actually been around for longer, and you can actually get some bigger discounts. So in the real world, the Ford is actually cheaper. Although the warranty on the VW is the 5-year promise, the 5-year servicing, the 5-year breakdown, 5-year warranty. But in the campervan world, because the discounts aren't as much for VW, we are seeing that the VWs are more than the Ford. Yet people are still buying the VW badge because it's a brand that has got that rich heritage, a brand that people want and seemingly people have waited for, even though the Ford came out before it. Let's see how this develops over the next 12 months. Let's see how sales actually go and how the used prices are going to be reflected in the market. But perhaps people are still buying the VWs because they want to go to that VW festival. And you can't turn up in a Ford. Or can you? You know, there are loads and loads of festivals these days and nobody's checking your logbook. You know, you go to the Dubbed Out Festival. They're not checking if you've got a Ford or a VW or a Nissan or whatever it is. You know, they're there for you to have a good time. They're putting on these fantastic events. You know, there's a lot more as well. You've got the Vanlife Festival. You've got the out and about live shows, and they've got their campouts and their festival as well. But what does 2026 hold? You know, we know that those usual hotspots, they're going to be popular, like they always are. The NC 500, the Southwest Coast Path and all their sites. You know, you've got the lakes and a lot more as well. But how many of you are heading down to Spain for the Total Eclipse in August? I believe it's in northern Spain, so you don't have to drive that 9 hours to get down to the south. You know, 12th of August, I think it is, and it's the Total Eclipse. And I think there's going to be quite a large pilgrimage of people going down there, especially in the campervans. You know, we do see a lot around that, around the Stonehenge area. Which brings me back to my plan. You know, there is a lot happening. But you do have to remember that this is just a hobby for me. You know, something that I really do enjoy doing. But I'm just a bloke talking about campervans. I'm not posting every hour for likes and engagement or begging for views or anything. You know, either people watch my videos or they don't. But what we have to stop doing is stop the negativity towards those who do. You know, it could be their job, it could be their livelihood, or in some cases just to help their mental health. You know, us on social media, we all do things differently. You know, we're doing it for different reasons. You know, some of the comments which I see on Facebook can be brutal, and half the time it doesn't even appear to be justified. You know, it's just absolute rubbish. You know, let's think before we comment. There's human people, human beings behind these cameras. You know, we are individuals. We've got, you know, emotions ourselves. You know, let's quit this negativity. It's just awful. Anyway, I don't really do an awful lot on Facebook, so it isn't actually a huge concern for me. Most of the comments which I get on here, I do say most of them, 99% of them, are actually brilliant, really good. I'd love to get into a conversation, bit of a disagreement at times and things like that. But as long as they're not abusive or, you know, just awful and completely infactual, then I'm happy to respond. You know, negativity comes with it. You know, social media, there is going to be negativity. And, you know, you can say whatever you want about vans and whatever and things like that. But let's not get personal. You know, there's just no need for it. It's just not needed. That said, I am going to be starting to dip my toe into Facebook and probably do a bit more on Instagram as well, because I do have a lot going on this year. So what exactly do I have going on? Well, I've got the budget van. I'm going to be testing out the budget van, showing how things can be done differently. It's done on a shoestring budget. You know, we're going to strip it back, go back. No wet room, no ambient lighting, no LEDs. Just a van. Start from scratch and show how a camper can be done on a variety of different budgets, mainly on that smaller end. You know, we're going to be looking at the buying process and looking at the pitfalls that many people can fall into. You know, I've seen people getting burnt by buying lemons because they fell in love with the paint job. There's going to be a few interesting conversations as far as that video is concerned. You know, and vans that I talk about won't just be VWs. I've got some alternatives coming here very, very soon. You know, of course, there's going to be that gadget video, the essential items for under £30. But not as I've shown before. This bit of video is going to have an alternative twist. Currently being worked on, watch this space. You know, there's going to be campervan conversation videos. I've got to say, they are my favourite videos, because I'm just not talking to myself. Because yeah, some people do say I'm dull and boring. You know, I'm going to be testing new vans too, and it's going to be from a range of converters. And as I'm not paid, I can say anything I want. And like I've said, there won't just be VWs. There's going to be a variety of vehicles from a variety of manufacturers. And I will, of course, be the NEC show. And this time for 3 days, purely because I talk too much and don't film as much as I should. No, I'm not going to be doing the meet and greet like one person asked for. I think that might be slightly embarrassing if I did arrange a, let's have a meet and greet, and then only one person thumbs up. No, it isn't going to happen. But if you do see me, then do say hello. More than happy to have a chat. As a few of you found out in the past when you've been stood there for 15 minutes. And I also intend to get out more during the year to meet you guys, hear your stories, see in your vans. You know, I'm meeting Shane soon. I'm going to be hearing about his pride and joy and the adventures which he's been on. And yeah, that is an expensive van, but a van that has been used exactly what it was built for. It's been used all sorts of different places, like we're going to be finding out about. This year I have the ideas more than I'm ever going to be able to film, because it is just a hobby. I only have the evenings, the weekends, and the holidays that I book off work. You know, there are going to be other people doing YouTube better. And I do feel honoured that some of you do compare me to some of these full-time YouTubers. You know, people with production companies, businesses, or some which are other financially supported. It does make me wonder, will there ever be a day that I turn my passion into something more? But what are my goals for 2026? You know, I'm not interested in the goals of hitting certain numbers of subscribers or any specific view numbers. You know, I'm not interested in that as far as the target's concerned. You know, don't get me wrong, I am really, really grateful for the views which I've had. I think it's something like 5.5 million or something like that, which is absolutely bonkers for me. And I know they are just small numbers. Lots of other people have done more, but for me, just me on my own, a one-man band, me who does everything myself, I think that is unbelievable. And I am very, very grateful for every single one of you who's ever watched any of these videos. I really genuinely do appreciate it. You know, I value every single view, but I'm not actually chasing the numbers. I'm wanting to make videos that actually help people, helping bring discussions to people that they might not have otherwise been involved in. You know, and generally just having fun, changing lives in the voluntary work which I do, living a healthy lifestyle, and hopefully I'm also going to improve my health. You know, do me a favor, let me know in the comments one big mission that you've got for 2026. What is your goal or your New Year's resolution? You know, I'm going to read every single one and hopefully be able to reply to them all, because I usually can, because there's never really that many. You know, we might even do a video in the future talking about some of them. You know, it's going to be a busy year, really, really full on. But it certainly beats being sat on the sofa watching TV. You can look at some of the conversation videos which I've had this year, especially this one surrounding why people are selling the VW Transporter campervans. Happy New Year, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon.